Okay, let's get started on our fifth lecture on learning. This is a chapter that has a lot of vocabulary in it. It's relatively short. It's only going to be 2 lectures, but there's a lot of information packed in there. This is kind of the stuff that when people talk about psychology, these are the terms that usually come up. All right, our first type of learning is classical conditioning. It has been around for a long time. It's a very basic form of conditioning. It is something that animals do, humans do. Anything with a halfway decent brain uses classical conditioning. It's a pairing of stimuli. Uh, Another term for that is actually learning. What classical conditioning is a simple form of learning in which one stimulus calls forth a response, usually brought forth by another stimulus. It occurs when they're associated with one another. Now, it's a lot of words, but what that actually means is something that causes you to have a reaction. That's something, whatever that may be, whether it be something that automatically causes you to salivate or something along that line, which you'll see here in a second, is paired with something else, and then this something else causes you to have that reaction. It'll make more sense here in just a minute. Okay, Ivan Pavlov was the main researcher in this particular thing. You may have heard his name before. He did a lot of research with dogs and their classical learning process. He was hired to actually find a better dog food, a dog food that dogs would prefer over other dog foods. So he put the dog in the harness, as you can see there in the picture. This thing, dogs is all, I don't know, not necessarily strapped up there, but he's held in one spot, and they would put a bowl of food in front of the dog, and the dog would salivate. Then he would measure how much the dog salivated. Well, okay, so that sounds pretty simple, but right before he would put the food out, he would ring a little bell to make sure everybody was paying attention and that he could have quiet so the dog could concentrate. But what happened is the dog started to pair that food with the bell. Bells usually don't cause dogs to salivate, but in this case, after doing it over and over and over again, the dog would salivate to the bell. He didn't have to wait for the food. So he was learning that the next thing down the road was going to be food after he heard that bell. So he has an unconditioned stimulus. It's a stimulus that causes a response that's automatic and not learned. That's the food in this particular case. Now, when he salivates to the food, that's an unconditioned response. Okay, that's pretty simple. The neutral stimulus is a stimulus that doesn't cause a reaction. So the first time or couple of times that he rang that bell, it didn't have a reaction for the dog. The dog hadn't learned it yet. But after he does it over and over and over again, he gets a conditioned stimulus. It's a neutral stimulus with, after repeated association, comes a learned stimulus. And it's this type of conditioning is an important way to react to your environment. If something happens, let's say, when animals notice, like when that big typhoon hit a couple years ago, it killed thousands and thousands of people. It didn't kill that many animals because they know that there are different symbols which we don't think anything of. Maybe the wind started blowing a certain way, and these things all the other animals could sense that. We didn't, but they know because of their environment that is something wrong, and they headed for the hills way before the people ever had an idea to head for the hills. So it's a good way to react to your environment. A conditioned response is the stimulus, or is the response to the learned stimulus. So this is salivation to the bell, not salivation to the food. It was previously neutral, now it's not. Okay, this is just an example here in advertising. You have an unconditioned stimulus, which would be those women's legs. Okay, when a guy sees those, sees a nice looking set of legs, and he gets mildly aroused by those legs. Now, the advertiser is hoping that I pair those legs with that car, so if I buy that car, I get those legs. I know it's stretching it, but that's kind of how that works. Okay, taste aversion is a learned avoidance to a particular food. It's one trial learning. You do it once, you get sick, you don't eat it again. If you eat some safe seafood and all of a sudden everything swells up, you're not going to eat it again. Animals do that all the time. They eat something that makes them sick, they don't touch it. So it's taste aversion. They've learned that which would normally not be a big deal, they paired that with being sick, so they're not going to do it. Extinction. Now, if I quit backing up the bell with food, when Pavlov would quit to give him food, I mean, after he'd rang that bell, I mean, it worked for several times, but eventually it will quit working. In other words, he'll quit salivating to the bell because there's no food coming. Now, if all of a sudden we back it up again and give the dog food after the bell, it's spontaneous. He doesn't have to go reteach it. His brain just automatically goes back to that mode and goes, oh, bell means food. So it's a spontaneous recovery of behaviors. Now, if every time that dog hears a bell, he starts to salivate, the doorbell rings, the phone rings, anything like that happens, and all of a sudden the dog starts to salivate, he thinks every bell means food's coming. He's generalizing. Now, the opposite of that is something called discrimination, the act of responding differently to stimuli that are similar but not identical. So you could train that dog to where one bell does this, another bell does this, another bell means this. That would be a discrimination type thing. But most dogs would probably just generalize because they're not smart enough to understand all those. All right, flooding is a type of classical conditioning where you expose a person to harmless stimuli until a fear response to that stimuli are extinguished. In other words, if you're scared of spiders, one way to get over that fear is to put you in a room full of spiders that are harmless until that fear is gone. Now, that seems pretty drastic, and for some of you it would totally freak you out. So you'd either lose it or you'd be able to overcome that fear. Something we have been using for years is systematic desensitization. It's like flooding, but it takes place gradually, not as dramatic. Now, what I mean by years is some of you probably had a pet in one of your elementary classes, maybe a snake, maybe a rat, something like that. Well, usually on the first day when they have that snake in there, most of the kids will not touch that snake. A couple will. There's always a couple boys that'll grab it, but the rest of them are very apprehensive about coming near it. But every day they get closer, they see other kids with it, they get closer and closer and closer, they're touching it, pretty soon they're holding it, and then by Christmas break, those kids are asking if they can take the snake home and take care of it over Christmas break. It's very gradual, it's a systematic process, and pretty soon it's gone. The fear is gone. Now, counter conditioning works something like that. It's when a pleasant stimulus is paired repeatedly with a fearful one, thus you counteract the fear. Let's say a little kid has a fear of dogs, and every time he gets near a dog, we give him something he wants. He gets a cookie. So there's a dog, here's a cookie, here's a dog, here's a cookie. So pretty soon he counteracts that fear. We've been doing this for years too. Every time you go to the doctor when you're a little kid, you're going to get a shot, they give you a sticker, or they give you a sucker, or something pleasant, and they pair that with that negative thing. So when you think doctor, you don't think shot, you think I'm getting a sucker. The bell and pad method is used to help bedwetters. It is using classical conditioning to solve this problem. You see that little pad there. You put that pad up underneath the sheet of the bed, and then you hang that little buzzer on the edge of the bed. And what will happen is when the child, usually a boy, wets the bed, it'll get the moisture will hit that pad, and the buzzer will go off and wake the kid up. Now you're thinking, well, how is that going to work? Because he's already peed the bed. What good is this? But just like the dog started to work to the previous stimulus, which would be the food, or which would be the bell, actually, this pad works. Right before that buzzer woke him up, his brain goes backwards and says, okay, what happened right before that? Oh, I had that full bladder feeling. Well, I know that means I have to pee. So it takes a couple times, but eventually that kid will wake up to that full bladder feeling rather than wait for that buzzer to wake up. So his brain's processing backwards. The other type of learning is operant conditioning. Operant conditioning works because we want something. We learn from the consequences of our action. Because you want good grades, you study. If you haven't studied forever, which a lot of kids in high school never really truly have, all of a sudden they study, they get an A on the test. Wow, I can do that. So because you want something, you do something. Because the dog wants a treat, he's going to sit up. So the head guy here is B.F. Skinner. He did extensive research with birds, rats, and operant conditioning. It's a picture of Skinner there. I don't know what BF stands for. Maybe big forehead. Anyway, he created these boxes called Skinner boxes. They're animal cages designed for a controlled experiment. Here's a picture of a typical one. It's got a shock grid there for whatever reason, a food trough, a lever, so that would be his behavior that he has to do is hit the lever, a light speaker. You could do a multitude of things with these Skinner boxes. Oops. Sorry about that. I messed up, pressed it too many times. The big part of operant conditioning is reinforcement. It is a process by which stimulus increase the chance that the preceding behavior will occur again. Reinforcement just means when some stimulus, something you want, is given to you, the chances of you doing a behavior will happen more often. Okay? A reinforcer is a stimulus that encourages a behavior to occur again. So it's anything that makes you want to hit the lever again, or make the rat hit the lever again. Primary reinforcers are a type of reinforcer that is due to our biological makeup. So in other words, it's things we have to survive. It's food, it's warmth, water, all these things. Now, since you have primary, of course you have to have secondary. Now, secondary doesn't go back to that basic, but through the association with the established stuff, which is the primary reinforcers, it works. Like money. Money doesn't do anything for you unless you can go out and spend it, but you have to learn that. Good grades, again, don't do anything for you, but you know with good grades down the road that will come in handy. A positive reinforcer increases the frequency of the behavior when they're applied. Food, social approval, all these things make you want to do it again because they're given to you. A negative reinforcer is a negative thing. It increases the behavior, because that's a reinforcer, when it's removed. In other words, you perform this behavior to get these things to stop. So if you're getting shocked, let's say, when you hit the button and the shocking stops, that's a negative reinforcer. Now don't confuse a negative reinforcer with punishment, because punishment would be applied and make you not want to do the behavior again. So if I press the button and I get shocked, that's not a negative reinforcer, that's punishment. We'll talk about that here shortly. Rewards are not the same as reinforcers. They're similar, but they vary on an individual basis. What's a reward for me, maybe a power tool, is not a reward for you. What's a reward for you, maybe going shopping at the mall, is torture for me. So that is not a reward at all. Now, punishment, like I said, is negative in that it is unpleasant, but the difference is that punishment decreases the behavior, not increases the behavior when it's applied. Now, why is it not to deal with the weight of problems? Well, punishment does not teach the alternate acceptable behavior. It only tells you what not to do. If your dog pees in the middle of the living room and you punish him for it, he knows, well, I won't pee there. Maybe I'll pee in the kitchen, or maybe I'll pee on your bed. Punishment only works when it's guaranteed. You know, they say statistically, after midnight, half the people on the road are inebriated or under the influence of alcohol. Now, if they knew there was a 100% chance that they were going to get caught, they wouldn't do that. But it only works when it's guaranteed. They got a good chance they're not going to get caught. Severely punished people or animals might try to leave the situation rather than change their behavior. I see that all the time. Punishment might produce anger or hostility. If I take your phone away for a week, you're going to be pretty upset about it. It may have broader effects than desired. It occurs when you're not aware whether you're being punished for. You know, if you did 3 things, you don't know which of the 3 things. One might have been good, one might have been bad, and you're getting punished for it. You're not going to do any of the 3 after you've been punished. It may be imitated as a way to solve problems. If you babysat for a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, you see the 5-year-old punish the 2-year-old and take over that parent role. And there may be an unforeseen benefits. Some of your rooms, if I send you to your room You've got a phone, you've got cable, you've got everything you could possibly need in there, so that might be a benefit. We'll continue this here on the next lecture.